One of the greatest threats to Elizabeth I came in the form of assassination attempts wrapped in religious divide and conflict. During her reign, she managed to see off the Spanish Armada, but there was a real fear across the country of invasion and also plotting domestically within the realm of England. Today we look at a man who was extremely close to the court of Elizabeth I and the Queen, and how he was executed in horrific fashion, being accused of treason by planning to poison the Queen. For Roderigo Lopez had an incredibly interesting life and rose to prominence as a royal doctor. He remains today the only royal doctor in English history to have been executed. So join us today as we look at the brutal execution of Roderigo Lopez, the physician to Elizabeth I. Remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Roderigo Lopez was born to a family of Jewish heritage in Portugal around the year 1517. His father was a doctor to John III of Portugal, and he was baptised being forced to do so. He was educated at university and enrolled on a medical course in December 1541, obtaining a degree in medicine in 1544. Lopez was believed to have been forced to leave Portugal due to his religious background, being a Jewish man who professed his Christian faith. However, secretly he adhered to the traditions and beliefs of the Jewish faith. Lopez arrived in England around 1558 to 1559 and settled there, changing his name to Roger so it sounded more English. Here he resumed practising as a doctor in London and he joined the Church of England. Within a short amount of time, being the skilled physician that he was, he became quickly the house physician of St Bartholomew's Hospital in Smithfield. One of his surgeon colleagues would state how Lopez showed himself to be very careful and very skillful in his counsel in dieting, purging and bleeding, with purging and bleeding being the most common treatments for illness during the medieval period. He became popular across London and his heritage did not hold him back like it had across Europe, and around 1563 he married Sarah Age, a woman whose father had also sought refuge from Portugal. At the time it was believed that the couple did secretly practice Judaism, which was illegal at the time in England, but on the outside they seemed law-abiding Anglicans, but their religious activities have been debated. The couple had 6 children, and Roderigo's brother would also live with him in their house in Holborn in London. As mentioned earlier, Lopez did begin to build a rather large practice of very powerful clients. Many of these patients were members of Elizabeth's royal court, including her own favourite and rumoured love, Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. Elizabeth's own spymaster and secretary, Sir Francis Walsingham, also visited Lopez, and with his gleaming reputation, he became acquainted with Queen Elizabeth I. He was made the physician-in-chief to Elizabeth I of England and her household in 1581, and was given a life pension of £50 a year. Elizabeth began to become rather fond of Lopez, and she liked and trusted him. For this she granted him a monopoly for importing aniseed and other herbs which were common and essential across apothecaries in London. In 1588 he was also given land in Worcestershire, which belonged to the Bishop of Worcester. A contemporary account from an English scholar writes on Lopez's rise, Dr. Lopez, the Queen's physician, is descended from Jews, but himself is a Christian and Portuguese. He is not the most learned or expert physician in her court, but one that makes a great account of himself. As the best he has grown much wealth and some reputation with the Queen, and the greatest of her lords and ladies. At the time in England, there were groups who believed there would be a plot by Catholics or Jewish doctors to poison patients. In Spain, some doctors were accused of murdering their patients or attempting to poison them. In 1584, an anonymous Catholic leaflet emerged criticising Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, and it also suggested that Lopez was one of the Earl's agents involved in poisoning and destroying children. At the time, Lopez was a man intrigued by diplomacy, and he spoke 5 languages very well. During England's war and hostility with Spain in 1580, he became a key member in a circle of Portuguese exiles in England, and he became the Queen's key liaison with Don Antonio, a Portuguese pretender who was living in England. Lopez supported Don Antonio, but one of Antonio's entourage wrote to the Spanish ambassador in Paris, saying that this individual could persuade Lopez to poison Antonio getting rid of the pretender. Roderigo approached the Spanish ambassador in Paris and intended on opening peace negotiations, and the Spanish even gave a jewelled ring worth a large sum to the doctor's daughter. Following the death of spymaster Francis Walsingham, Lopez continued to exchange letters with Spanish officials without gaining permission from the English government, or even without anyone knowing. It has been argued that Lopez in these exchanges could have even been working for Francis Walsingham instead, acting as a double agent. In the early 1590s, Lopez was a very wealthy and highly thought of doctor, and he owned a rather large house in Holborn. However, he would cross paths with one of Queen Elizabeth's favourites, Robert Devereux, who would personally ensure the downfall of the royal doctor. Following the death of Walsingham, Devereux, the Earl of Essex, took control of his intelligence service. This included the use of cryptologists who had previously deciphered notes that led to Mary Queen of Scots' execution. Devereux was now able to provide all secret information to Elizabeth directly, and the Queen greatly liked this information she was getting. She needed the intelligence to help protect her realm, and Devereux would tell her directly of any threats or problems. It's thought that while Lopez was treating Devereux for syphilis, there was some animosity between them. Devereux began to compile evidence against Lopez and implicate him as an undercover agent for Philip II of Spain. Initially, the claims Devereux made were laughed at by the Queen herself, but in late 1593 he found a secret letter between one of Don Antonio's former supporters and officials in the Spanish Netherlands. From this, 2 men were arrested who implicated Lopez in the crimes during interrogation, and on the 28th of January 1594, Devereux wrote of the most dangerous and desperate treason against Elizabeth, with the executioner being Dr. Lopez, and the manner of assassination being by poison. One of the arrested men, Manuel Luis Tinoco, and the other, Esteval Ferreira de Gama, was threatened with torture, and through this it was confessed that the doctor did plan to poison the Queen. The 2 men confessed to have been involved in a conspiracy with Roderigo Lopez, and that they had agreed to poison the Queen for 50,000 crowns, paid for by Philip II of Spain. On the rack, one of the men confessed that he accepted the money from the Spanish to carry out the poisoning using exotic drugs from abroad. The secret correspondence Lopez was having with Spanish officials did not help his case, neither did the fact he was donating allegedly to a secret synagogue in Antwerp. Lopez was arrested and held first at Essex House, Devereux's personal residence, before being imprisoned at the Tower of London. He was worn down by the relentless interrogation of Devereux's officials and by the threat of brutal torture, and because of this, he signed his own confession, but later recanted. Lopez, along with de Gama and Tinoco, were trialled by a commission chaired by Devereux at Guildhall on the 28th of February 1594. Lopez claimed he was innocent, but the prosecutor criticised the doctor as a perjured, murdering villain and a Jewish doctor worse than Judas himself. The 3 men were convicted of high treason, being found guilty, and all were sentenced to death. Elizabeth waited over 3 months before bringing herself to sign the death warrant for Dr. Lopez. It's thought that she failed to believe the evidence and the case put forward by Robert Devereux, and this reticence shows us that she did not necessarily want to put her doctor to death. On the 7th of June 1594, Dr. Roderigo Lopez, de Gama and Tinoco were all taken to Tyburn, the famous place of execution in London, to die. They were taken from the Tower of London to the scaffold, being dragged through the streets on a hurdle. The 3 were due to be hanged, drawn and quartered, undergoing one of the most horrific deaths known to man during the Tudor period. It involved the condemned being drawn through the streets on a hurdle in front of the crowds, then they would be brought to the scaffold and hanged until almost dead. They would then be cut down and their insides ripped out and genitals cut off before these were burned. Then the condemned would be cut up into 4 bits and quartered, often with their heads also being placed on spikes above monuments such as London Bridge. It was this fate that Dr. Roderigo Lopez suffered. Towards the end of his imprisonment, he had fallen into a deep depression and longed for his ordeal to be over. He insisted throughout that he was a genuine Christian. Whilst on the scaffold, he spoke to the crowd and professed his love for the Queen and Jesus Christ. At this point, the huge crowd which had assembled to see the death of the man they thought was a traitor laughed at these statements, and they didn't value anything that he said. Following this, Lopez was hanged until almost dead. Then he had his insides ripped out and burned before being cut into different sections. It's clear that what led to the execution of Dr. Roderigo Lopez was the persistence and drive of Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, and it's clear that maybe there was some animosity between the two men. Lopez was a key member of Elizabeth I's court, and she valued him greatly, but eventually was convinced to sign his death warrant. It's considered that Roderigo Lopez is the influence behind Shakespeare's character of Shylock, and also how his downfall and execution occurred at a time in which Devereux took advantage of the anti-Semitism across England. What isn't debatable though is in his role as Doctor, he was incredibly good at his profession before he fell sharply from grace. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.